What if I told you that the son of an NFL legend went from a guaranteed first-round pick to being completely removed from multiple teams' draft boards? That NFL owners, not coaches, not general managers, but owners themselves demanded his name be erased from consideration? And what if I told you that the Pittsburgh Steelers, a franchise desperate for a quarterback, passed on him not once, but twice, even though their head coach praised him publicly? This isn't some wild conspiracy theory. This actually happened 8 months ago, and the fallout is about to explode this Sunday when Shedeur Sanders, Deion Sanders' son, walks into a stadium where he was supposed to be the future, but instead became the biggest draft mystery of the decade. And what Sanders just said about his own future has everyone in Pittsburgh absolutely stunned. If you want the full story on how one of the most talented quarterbacks in college football became persona non grata across the NFL, smash that subscribe button right now, because this rabbit hole goes deeper than anyone imagined, and you're not going to believe what really happened behind closed doors. Let me take you back to December 2024. Shedeur Sanders just wrapped up his final season at Colorado with jaw-dropping numbers: 4,134 passing yards, 37 touchdowns, and a completion percentage that put him at the top of FBS history. Scouts were drooling. Draft analysts had him pegged as a top 10 pick, maybe even top 5. This wasn't some small school quarterback with questionable competition. This was the real deal, a kid who had been groomed by one of the greatest athletes America has ever seen, playing under the brightest spotlight college football could offer. In January 2025, Shedeur Sanders' name was being thrown around alongside Cam Ward as the two premier quarterback prospects. Teams that desperately needed a franchise signal caller were circling. The New York Giants had picked number 3. Sanders was in the conversation. The New Orleans Saints at number 9? Absolutely. But the team that made the most sense, the team that seemed destined to draft him, was the Pittsburgh Steelers at pick 21. Mike Tomlin, the legendary Steelers head coach who never has a losing season, had gone on record praising Sanders. After Colorado's pro day, Tomlin was effusive about the young quarterback's toughness, competitive spirit, and intangible qualities that don't always show up on stat sheets. The Steelers brought Sanders in for a pre-draft visit. Everything seemed to be aligning perfectly. Pittsburgh needed a quarterback. Sanders needed a team. Match made in heaven, right? But then something happened at the NFL Combine in March, something that would change everything. Behind closed doors, in interview rooms across Indianapolis, Shedeur Sanders began to rub people the wrong way. According to multiple reports, Sanders walked into these meetings with a level of confidence that crossed into something else entirely. One longtime NFL assistant coach, speaking anonymously to NFL Network, called Sanders' formal interview the worst I've ever been in my life. He described Sanders as entitled, blamed teammates for mistakes, had horrible body language, and then dropped the killer line. But the biggest thing is, he's not that good. Other reports started surfacing. Sanders allegedly told teams that if they wanted to change their culture, he was the guy who could do it. He positioned himself as a transformational figure, the answer to all their problems. For some organizations, that kind of swagger is attractive, but for old-school NFL executives who've seen thousands of cocky college kids wash out, it was a massive red flag. Then there was the Deion Sanders factor. Coach Prime, Sanders' father and coach at Colorado, started making waves about potentially pulling an Eli Manning situation, referring to when Eli Manning refused to play for the San Diego Chargers in 2004 and forced a draft day trade to the New York Giants. Deion was openly talking about steering his son away from certain organizations, about having input on where Shedeur would land. For NFL teams that value organizational control and autonomy, this was borderline unacceptable. As the draft approached in late April, whispers turned into shouts. Shedeur Sanders' stock was plummeting, but nobody, and I mean nobody, expected what would happen on draft night. April 24th, 2025, Lambeau Field in Green Bay, Wisconsin. The NFL draft begins. Cam Ward goes first overall to the Tennessee Titans. Travis Hunter, Sanders' Colorado teammate, goes second to Jacksonville. And then, pick after pick after pick. The Giants take someone else at 3, the Saints pass at 9. The Pittsburgh Steelers, with that 21st pick that seemed tailor-made for Sanders, selected defensive linemen instead. But here's where it gets really crazy. Art Rooney, too, the Steelers' owner and president, goes on Steelers Nation radio during the draft and says something fascinating. He says the team might still draft a quarterback, but it would be someone developmental, someone who wouldn't start right away. He mentions the team is waiting on Aaron Rodgers, the legendary quarterback who was contemplating coming to Pittsburgh. The message was clear. The Steelers weren't taking a quarterback to start immediately. Shedeur Sanders, the most pro-ready quarterback in the draft according to many analysts, didn't fit that mold. The second round comes and goes. Sanders' name isn't called. Third round? Nothing. Pittsburgh has another pick, and they take a running back. They pass on Sanders again. By the time Saturday rolled around, day 3 of the draft, the football world was in absolute shock. How is Shedeur Sanders, a guy who many had projected as a top 10 pick just weeks earlier, still on the board in the 5th round? And then came the bombshell that explains everything. Boomer Esiason, the former NFL MVP and current radio host, went on his show Monday morning after the draft and dropped a nuclear revelation. He claimed that he had spoken to 3 different NFL personnel executives who confirmed that Shedeur Sanders wasn't just passed over, he was removed from their draft boards entirely. And it wasn't the scouts or coaches who made that call, it was the owners. Boomer said Shedeur Sanders just torpedoed himself. His attitude off the field, all those bad meetings at the combine, his dad didn't help him either. I'm telling you right now, after talking to 3 different personnel people in the NFL this weekend, they didn't even have him on their board. They took him off, and they took him off because the owner said, "Take him off. I don't want that guy. I don't want this entitled person on our team." Let that sink in. NFL owners, billionaires who rarely get involved in day-to-day football decisions, personally intervened to ensure Shedeur Sanders would not be drafted by their organizations. This wasn't about talent. This wasn't about arm strength or accuracy or football IQ. This was about perception, about attitude, about the baggage that came with Sanders' name. Was Pittsburgh one of those teams? Art Rooney, too, never explicitly confirmed it, but the circumstantial evidence is damning. They praised him publicly through Tomlin. They brought him in for a visit. They had 2 chances to draft him, and both times they passed. Even when Sanders was sitting there in the 3rd round, a potential steal, they chose a running back instead.
Finally, in the 5th round, with the 144th overall pick, the Cleveland Browns selected Shedeur Sanders. And even then, the Browns had already drafted another quarterback, Dillon Gabriel from Oregon, 50 picks earlier. Sanders wasn't even Cleveland's first choice at his own position. Flash forward to November 2025. The NFL season is underway. Cleveland is a disaster, sitting at 3-12, one of the worst records in football. Dillon Gabriel suffers an injury, and suddenly Shedeur Sanders is thrust into the starting lineup. His first few games are rough. 3 interceptions against the Bears, 2 against the Bills. The rookie struggles are real. But there are flashes, too. A 364-yard, 3-touchdown performance against Tennessee. Deep ball accuracy that had been missing from Cleveland's offense all year. Leadership qualities that his teammates are starting to rally around. And then, this week, Sanders makes a statement that has everyone talking. As the Browns prepare to face Pittsburgh this Sunday, a reporter asks Sanders about his future with the organization. Keep in mind, Cleveland holds the 3rd overall pick in the 2026 draft. They could easily draft another quarterback, a higher pick, someone to replace Sanders entirely. The question hangs in the air. Does Sanders feel secure about his future? His response is shockingly humble, almost defeated. "I live in the present," Sanders says. "I'm focused on this week because nothing's promised going into next year or anything. I don't think it's about feeling a commitment. It's about controlling what you can control. The rest isn't in my hands. I don't own the organization, so I can't promise anything will happen. I'm not God. I can't dictate what's going to happen each and every day, each and every minute." That phrase, "I don't own the organization," hits differently when you remember what happened 8 months ago. This is a kid who allegedly walked into draft interviews acting like he owned the place, like he was God's gift to whatever franchise was lucky enough to select him. And now, he's openly acknowledging his powerlessness, his vulnerability, the reality that he could be replaced at any moment. For Art Rooney II and the Pittsburgh Steelers, this has to be a moment of reflection. Was their evaluation correct? Did they dodge a bullet by passing on Sanders twice? Or did they make a catastrophic mistake that will haunt them for years? Because here's the thing,
The Pittsburgh Steelers are still looking for their franchise quarterback. Aaron Rodgers never came. They're 9-6, fighting for a playoff spot, but there's no long-term answer at the most important position in football. Mason Rudolph isn't the future. Russell Wilson, their current starter, is 36 years old. Meanwhile, Shedeur Sanders, the kid they could have had in the third round, maybe even the first if they'd been bold enough, is developing in Cleveland, learning from his mistakes, showing flashes of brilliance. Mike Tomlin, to his credit, hasn't backed down from his praise. This week, before the Steelers-Browns matchup, Tomlin was asked about Sanders and once again highlighted his toughness and competitive spirit. He is doing a really good job. He's growing with each week from an outsider's perspective. I think it's always cool when you're growing with company. That comment, growing with company, is telling. The Browns have been catastrophically bad this year, yet Sanders is developing despite the chaos around him. He's getting better, he's learning, and eventually, when the talent catches up to the situation, Shedeur Sanders could become exactly what everyone thought he'd be back in January, a franchise quarterback. But there's another layer to this story that makes it even more complex. The attitude issues that supposedly tanked Sanders' draft stock. There's evidence that some of it might have been overblown. Yes, he was confident, maybe even arrogant in some interviews, but consider the context. This is a young man who grew up with Deion Sanders as his father, one of the most flamboyant, confident athletes in American sports history. Sanders was taught to believe in himself, to carry himself with swagger, to never back down. That's the Sanders family brand. And let's be brutally honest here, some of the criticism aimed at Sanders felt racially coded. When a young black quarterback speaks with confidence about his abilities, about being a culture changer, about transforming an organization, he's labeled as entitled and arrogant. When a white quarterback does the exact same thing, he's called a leader and confident. The double standard is real, and it's hard to ignore when you look at how Sanders was treated versus how other quarterback prospects were evaluated. There's also the question of whether NFL teams were scared off by the Deion factor more than anything Shedeur himself did. Coach Prime is a force of nature, a media magnet who dominates headlines wherever he goes. Some teams might genuinely worry that drafting Shedeur would mean dealing with Deion's constant media presence, his opinions on how his son should be used, his potential interference in team decisions. That fear, whether justified or not, could have been enough to sink Shedeur's draft stock all by itself. Now, as we approach Sunday's Browns-Steelers game, the storylines are almost too perfect. Shedeur Sanders, fighting for his NFL future, facing a team that passed on him twice. Art Rooney II watching from the owner's box, knowing his team desperately needs a quarterback for the future. Mike Tomlin, who publicly praised Sanders but couldn't convince his organization to draft him, now scheming to destroy the rookie on the field. The Steelers are 27-6 against rookie quarterbacks under Mike Tomlin's tenure, the best record in the NFL. They feast on inexperienced signal callers. They sacked Dylan Gabriel 6 times earlier this season when Cleveland came to Pittsburgh. The Browns' offensive line is a disaster. On paper, this should be a bloodbath.
But here's what makes sports beautiful. Sometimes the script gets flipped. Sometimes the kid with something to prove finds another level. Sometimes the team that passed you over lives to regret it. Will Shedeur Sanders light up Pittsburgh for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns, making every owner who removed him from their draft board look like a fool? Will he crumble under the pressure of one of the NFL's best defenses, confirming all the doubts about his ability to succeed at this level? Or will he do what he's done all season, show flashes of brilliance mixed with rookie mistakes, gradually improving week by week, building towards something special down the road? What we know for certain is this: the story of Shedeur Sanders and the Pittsburgh Steelers is far from over. Whether Pittsburgh regrets their decision won't be clear for years. Maybe they were right to pass. Maybe Sanders' attitude really was a legitimate concern that would have poisoned their locker room. Or maybe, just maybe, they let fear and perception cloud their judgment on a genuinely talented player who needed the right environment to flourish. The other fascinating element here is how Sanders has responded to adversity.
After being humiliated on draft night, falling to the 5th round, becoming Cleveland's second choice at quarterback, and then struggling through early starts, Sanders could have pouted. He could have blamed others. He could have confirmed every negative stereotype about his entitled attitude. Instead, he's shown remarkable humility. His comments this week about not owning the organization, about nothing being promised, about just trying to earn his spot, those aren't the words of an entitled prima donna. Those are the words of someone who's been humbled by the NFL, who understands how quickly this league can chew you up and spit you out. His brother, Deion Sanders Jr., has been vocal in supporting Shedeur through the struggles, defending him on social media, showing up to his games. The Sanders family has rallied around Shedeur in his difficult rookie season, and Coach Prime himself publicly supported Shedeur's silent, mime-like response to questions about the Dylan Gabriel situation, calling it a perfect way to handle adversity. But through it all, Shedeur has had to reckon with a brutal reality. Talent alone isn't enough in the NFL. Character matters. Perception matters. How you carry yourself in interviews, how you treat people, how you handle success and failure, all of it gets scrutinized at a level most college players can't even imagine. The LA Eagles have a saying, "No overnight successes." Jalen Hurts, their franchise quarterback, sat behind Carson Wentz, learned, grew, and eventually became an MVP candidate. Maybe that's Shedeur Sanders' path too. Maybe falling to the 5th round, suffering through a brutal rookie season with a terrible team, getting humbled by the NFL. Maybe all of that is exactly what he needed to become great. Or maybe the NFL owners who removed him from their draft boards were right all along. Maybe Sanders doesn't have what it takes. Maybe the attitude concerns were legitimate. Maybe his ceiling is as a solid backup who never becomes a starter. Time will tell. What's not in question is that Sunday's game has taken on enormous significance beyond the standings. For Shedeur Sanders, it's a chance to prove himself against the team that didn't want him. For Art Rooney II, it's a referendum on his organization's decision-making. For Mike Tomlin, it's validation that praising Sanders publicly was fine, but ultimately the Steelers made the right call by passing on him. The Cleveland Browns are 3-15. They're going nowhere this season. But Shedeur Sanders still has 2 games to show something, to prove he deserves to be the starter in 2026, to make the league regret how far he fell. And doing it against Pittsburgh, in front of a fan base that once thought he might be their future, would be the sweetest revenge imaginable. This Sunday, when Shedeur Sanders drops back to pass against the Pittsburgh Steelers, remember everything that led to this moment. Remember the draft night humiliation. Remember the owners who removed him from their boards. Remember Pittsburgh passing on him twice. Remember his humble admission that he doesn't own the organization, that nothing is promised. And then watch closely, because whether Shedeur Sanders succeeds or fails, whether he becomes a star or fades into obscurity, his story is a reminder that the NFL draft isn't just about talent. It's about perception, politics, and the human judgment of imperfect evaluators trying to predict an unpredictable future.